Hi guys, welcome back to the next episode of the TRA Education Podcast. With me, your tiny titan host, Vicky Mirceta. As you know, I never change, although I have changed my appearance just slightly because I've got some big geek glasses on the go now. It's just to make myself look a little bit more intelligent when I'm speaking to my epic intelligent guests. And my guest today is none other than Stephan Guyenet. Stephan, good morning. How are you today?
I'm good. Good morning, Vicky.
Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for giving up your time to, basically educate us in some of the prior research that you had fun doing. Just for people who don't actually know you very well, will you just give us a little bit of a background about who you are and what your prior interests were and why I've invited you onto the TRA podcast today?
Yeah, so I have always been interested in science and fitness, and essentially I took the path of studying neuroscience. I got my PhD at the University of Washington in neurobiology, and I then used that to do research on the neuroscience of body fatness and eating behavior. So we were studying the brain circuits that regulate how much we eat and what we eat, and particularly how much body fat our bodies hang on to. And so that kind of brought together my interests in neuroscience and science in general and fitness. And during my time in the research world, I realized that researchers had and were developing pretty incredible insights on how eating behavior and body fatness works. And I also realized that those insights were often not really getting translated effectively to a general audience. And that led me to write my book, The Hungry Brain, which came out a little more than a year ago.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, I'm really interested in hearing more about this body fat set point theory that has been battered around quite a lot in the fitness industry, quite recently, and then it went quiet and then it came back up again. But the reason why I'm so interested about it is that a lot of people know me as getting or being able to get extremely lean, and extremely lean for a woman to the point where I am looking inside out. And it's very, very easy for me to do that. Whereas a lot of women struggle with that, and they hold on to body fat, particularly in the lower half of their bodies. So let's talk a little bit about body fat and why our bodies like having a particular set point, and then we can get into maybe why it's so easy for somebody like me to lose a lot of body fat, but then actually struggle to put some on, regardless of the kind of calories that I'm on as well. So go ahead, Stephan, you start off with that one.
Yeah. So that's a great question, and it's an important question. And it's clear that if we look at a cross section of people, we can see tremendous variability in the amount of body fat they have, and also in how easy it is for them to change their body fat, either in a positive or negative direction. And so, anytime we see differences between individuals in a population, there are two possible explanations for that. One is genetics and the other one is environment. Those are the only two, broadly speaking, things that could be going on. And I think we know that both of those things are important. So most of the differences in body fatness between individuals in modern affluent societies is explained by genetic differences. So about 70% of the differences in body mass index are explained by genetic differences. So genetics is huge. And we know actually already a fair amount about the genetics, not only of body fatness in general, but also of body fat distribution. And so, and those are actually different things physiologically. So someone may be more or less prone to carrying a lot of body fat, but that is at least partially independent of how they will carry the fat that they have, whether that fat will occur in the visceral cavity, which is thought to be more unhealthy, or whether it will occur under the skin, subcutaneous fat, which is thought to be a more healthy way to store fat. Furthermore, we see in scientific studies, we see that different people respond very differently to overeating. And so when you put a number of people on an excess of, this is one experiment that's been done. They put a group of people on an excess of 1,000 calories per day. So very controlled, tightly controlled conditions. Everyone is getting 1,000 calories more than they would normally eat. So the same excess calories for everyone. Some people hardly gain any fat, and some people put every excess calorie straight into their fat tissue. So there's huge differences that occur. And we don't know exactly why that is. Probably a lot of it is genetic. Some people are probably just more genetically resistant. Can
I just ask before you go on with that study that they were at 1,000 calorie surplus? Was the macro distribution the same, or was it just based on calories?
Just calories, yeah. So the macro distribution was the same. Everything was the same. Yeah. Everything was the same between individuals. The only thing that differed was, so the absolute number of calories was different between individuals because some people needed more or fewer calories just to maintain their weight.
For sure.
And so they just added an excess, but the macronutrients were the same. They're eating the same food and the same excess. So really they were just looking at individual differences in how people deal with a calorie excess. And by the way, we don't really know how that might differ by macronutrient. Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. We do know there are experiments that have done that. And basically, if you're just looking at fat versus carb, it doesn't matter if you're overeating fat versus carb. For the average person, the body fat gain from a specific number of calories will be the same, whether it's from fat or carbohydrate. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, there's this huge amount of variability. Some people, and it's not like the people who didn't gain fat, it's not like they suddenly decided they wanted to get on a treadmill and run a bunch. That's not at all what happened. It was a non-conscious response orchestrated by their body's physiology that basically incinerated the extra calories. And so these people's bodies just ramped up their calorie expenditure naturally. That I'm saying the subset of them that didn't gain weight, they just ramped up their calorie expenditure and just incinerated off the extra calories, whereas other people didn't do that at all. And so, so there are these huge differences. Probably a lot of it's genetics. Probably some of it is not genetics. So there have been studies that tried to figure out why is it that some people can do this and some people can't. And one of the things that they found in these studies is that people who are more physically fit at baseline seem to have a greater ability to burn off excess calories. So the more fit you are, the more likely it is that when you overeat, your body will be able to just burn that off and not accumulate it as body fat. So, and we don't know, these are kind of observational results. We don't really know for a fact. You know, we see an association between physical fitness and the ability to burn off excess calories. We don't necessarily know whether that's a cause and effect relationship. Those experiments haven't been done, but I think it's certainly at least plausible to suspect that your level of baseline fitness would impact your ability to handle calorie excesses in a healthy, constructive way. So yeah, so basically when you look at when you look at the genetics of body fatness, people's propensity to gain more or less fat has a lot to do with how our brains are constructed. So the genes that relate to body fatness, many of them have to do with how your brain is constructed and how your brain operates. Whereas if you look at genes for body fat distribution, those are not as much related to brain function. Those are more related to hormonal things like how insulin is functioning, insulin signaling, determining kind of where that fat ends up in your body, but not so much the total amount of fat in your body. And so, yeah, so that's just kind of an overview of what we know. But I think just to kind of summarize it briefly, part of it's probably genetics, almost certainly. So you, for example, you probably have a genetic predisposition to be lean and to be able to lose fat easily. And then part of it is probably environmental too. So, you know, I can tell by looking at you that you're quite fit. You probably do a lot of exercise. that's probably part of the reason as well that your body is able to do that. And so there's probably a genetic component and an environmental component, but we don't have all the details worked out yet of how that works.
See, it's interesting that you say it, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring myself up, because I know that I am an outlier, and a lot of people don't want to consider the outliers, or they do consider them, but they forget about them in scientific correlation studies, because obviously they just look at the majority, don't they? But it's a lot of the time people say to me, how can you eat so much food and stay so lean? Because I am 50 kilos. I weighed in at 50.2 kilos this morning, and I am only 5'1.5". That half is extremely important. And I can eat upwards of 3,300 calories quite easily, with an excess of 400 grams of carbs, and realistically maintain that weight. I only train 5 days a week as well, and I don't do any cardio. I am fairly busy. You know, I do upwards of about 15,000 steps a day because I've got a big dog and 2 kids and stuff. But the majority of people, including my clients who are around about the same as me, they tend to struggle to maintain or even lose weight on things like 1,500 calories. So I am a little bit of an outlier. But with you saying that it was partly genetics, I've always been a fat kid. Like it was really difficult for me to get lean the very first time that I did get insanely lean. However, I did suffer very much with an eating disorder from the age of 12. Where I was anorexic and I basically didn't eat anything. Now, what I found in almost like an own personal study, but from anecdotal experience of working with other people as well, people who have suffered with eating disorders and have consciously restricted their food to sub 300 calories a day, for example, and their body fat levels have got down to literally nothing, they can now eat a hell of a lot of calories and still struggle to put on body fat. Now, do you think this is where maybe we've changed something with our brain or with our genetics, or is it all external influences that have caused that possibly?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing about genes versus environment is that you can never really know in any specific individual how much of it is genetic and how much of it is environment. All you can really say is that, you know, in general and as a population average, we can see, you know, X amount of influence from genes, X amount from environment. We don't really have the ability right now. So me saying that your, you know, how your body works is partly genetic, that's me speculating about that. It seems likely, but I can't say for sure that that's the case. So I think, but you have to keep in mind that genetics influences every aspect of our bodies and brains. So like maybe other people who had the same history as you, the same like childhood, the same eating disorders, may not respond in exactly the same way as you did, based on, you know, just how your body is constructed, how your genes are. So, but yeah, certainly, I mean, what you expose your body to previously, your environment, affects how your genes are expressed. It affects how you are now. So, I mean, I don't know about specifically the impact of eating disorders or anorexia on later body composition and later kind of susceptibility to body fat accumulation. So I don't know anything about that piece specifically, but just as a general principle, I mean, we know that environmental exposures can affect how your body operates later and affect your body composition later. So just as a general principle, that doesn't seem that surprising to me.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting because it's, I mean, I've got another anorexic client. I'm going to say anorexic. She's actually recovering, because I never say that we are completely recovered. It stays with us for life. And she's exactly the same. So she's actually now eating 100 grams of fat, 500 grams of carbs, and 180 grams of protein, and not gaining any weight. And I know that she's doing it as well because I make her send photos to me, and it just kind of mimics it. It was just interesting. So in terms of, let's talk about the hungry brain perspective. So in relation to maybe myself holding on to a low amount of body fat and finding it very, very difficult to put on. Is there anything that you would say that my brain is possibly doing to stop me from getting that body fat on, rather than me just saying, well, I am eating all of these calories? Is there something possibly that's subconscious that we can maybe click on?
Yeah, so I think this gets at a really important question in obesity research right now, and that is what makes lean people lean. Yeah. Because there's been a lot of research on what makes people with obesity obese, but really not very much on what makes lean people lean. But people are starting to work on that. So, you know, right now there are researchers who are actually looking for people like you, people who are exceptionally lean and who have trouble putting on weight, and trying to study the genetics of that. And there are the genetics and the physiology of it. And there are a couple of reasons for that. You know, the genetics is it's not just about learning about genetics, it's about learning about mechanisms, because once you understand the genetics of something, that tells you a lot about what physiological pathways influence that thing. So for example, if you look at the genetics of height differences in people, height differences are highly genetic. And so you can say that you look at the genes that are implicated, and many of them are related to growth of the skeleton, growth of connective tissue, kind of all the stuff you would expect, right?
Yeah.
And that tells you, okay, well, these are mechanisms that are involved in height differences between individuals. And so if you can get at the genetics of leanness, then you can start to get at the mechanisms that cause people to be lean. But the truth is, we don't know. We don't know we can talk about this more later if you want, but there is a system in the body that robustly protects against fat loss in most people. So that is a system that's seated in the brain and measures your body fat level. It's the body fat set point, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. That system is really good at preventing fat loss, but it's not so good at preventing fat gain. Specifically the system that involves leptin, which is the one that we understand the best. Sure. There is another system. We know it exists, but we don't know what the mechanism is. There's another system that protects against fat gain. And this has been demonstrated recently in mice that this system does not depend on leptin. And so there is a different system. We have no idea how it works yet, but it probably involves some of these same brain circuits, but it is not connected by the same hormone that makes it hard for us to lose weight.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is research ongoing on this, but we don't currently really know how that works at all.
It's so fascinating about what makes lean people lean, like you were talking about with leptin and ghrelin. So just so people who don't really understand leptin and ghrelin so much, we're talking about hunger hormones, aren't we? And signaling to the brain whether you're full or whether you're hungry. Do you want to explain that a little bit in more scientific detail than I do?
Yeah, sure. So there's basically two levels of regulation happening in the brain. So just to give you the general concept, the brain regulates the body's energy status. So your energy status is very, very important for your ability to do the things that you do, to, do your daily activities, to survive and reproduce. And so we have these systems in the brain that regulate your body's energy status. And there's basically, and that comes in the form of basically two things. One is glycogen, which is stored carbohydrate in the body. And the other one, which is really the main thing, is stored fat. Yeah. And that has most of the available calories in your body are in the form of stored fat. And there actually is a third one that is regulated, and that is the food that's actually currently in your digestive tract.
Okay.
And so basically the regulatory system in your body that regulates your body's energy status has two components. One is the long term and one is the short term. The short term is the one that's regulating your intake at individual meals. So that's your satiety system. That's the system that makes you want to stop eating after you've had a certain amount of food. And that's located in your brainstem. Basically, it receives signals from your digestive tract as you're eating that tell your brainstem how much you've eaten. Those signals build up until the point where it's like, okay, we've had enough, we're done. And then there's a long-term system that is measuring your body fat level and setting the gain on the short-term system. So basically, it's measuring your level of body fatness via this hormone leptin. And it is, if your body fat goes too low, then it says to your short-term system, it says, hey, we're going to need you to eat larger meals. And so then it takes longer for you to reach that point where you're full. It does some other things too, like it can affect your calorie expenditure. But basically that is regulating your body fatness. And then the short-term system is regulating your meal size in order to support that long-term system that is regulating your body fatness. The long-term system is in your hypothalamus, which is another part of your brain. Yeah. And that's the mechanism that determines the body fat set point. I call it the lipostat in my book. Yeah. And so most of the hormones that regulate the body's energy status are related to the short-term system. So the satiety hormones like CCK, ghrelin is a kind of reverse satiety hormone. It's a hunger hormone. Glucagon, amylin, PYY. Anyway, there's a bunch of them. And those mostly are involved in that short-term meal-to-meal system. The long-term system is mostly leptin, somewhat ghrelin as well.
Fantastic. So the reason why I bring that up is because I keep on mentioning that my ghrelin and my leptin hormones are completely messed up. And with everything that you've just explained there, it completely makes sense. And the reason why I say that is because I am always hungry and I am never full. No matter what I eat, I can sit here with a big, huge pot belly and I will never, ever, ever be full. I can still carry on eating. Everybody knows quite a lot that, because I've mentioned it quite a few times, that in my very first bodybuilding prep where I did get extremely low, I lost my menstrual cycle, which has then been diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea. So, of course, my hypothalamus has got something to do with it. So everything seems to correlate as to why I'm still very lean and why I struggle to put on body fat, regardless of what I eat. Because like we just said, I can eat a lot. I can eat in 1,000 calorie surplus, and I will kind of like jump up a little bit on the scales for a day, and then I'll just lose it again. It's a very, very weird scenario. So moving forward, have we got any, what's the idea behind, or have we got any kind of idea at all about why lean people continue to stay lean regardless of what they eat?
Yeah. So, and by the way, there can be many different reasons why someone is lean versus obese. And you can see this in the genetics. There are genetic influences on how likely we are to overeat, genetic influences on how much we overeat when we're exposed to particularly delicious food, how much food it takes us to feel full, whether we prefer carbohydrates or fats or protein. Basically, any aspect of eating behavior you want to look at has a genetic component to it. And this has been already looked at. And so if someone who's lean could be lean just because they don't eat very much, or they could be lean because they do eat too much, but their body just burns it off. So there are different ways to be lean, the same as there are different ways to have obesity. And so, sorry, your question was, just to remind myself, why are lean people lean? Was that the question?
Or have we got any ideologies behind it? So obviously this research is going forward now. What elements are we looking into as to what we're trying to figure out, basically? Are we going to be doing brain scans? Are we going to be doing feeding tests on, different macronutrient ratios, that kind of thing?
I don't know, actually. I'm not directly involved in that research, so I'm not sure what people are doing.
Right. Okay. It would just be interesting because, like you said, just there, some people can eat like a higher carbohydrate diet, which is my preference, just because I like carbs, you know, because they're yummy. And some people can eat a lower fat diet. And in that case, they just don't put on any weight because their body just uses the carbs a lot. And I have found that, especially when I start increasing my carbohydrate level, my body tends to be a lot hotter. I just tend to run hotter, and I tend to sweat a lot more. And I tend to almost lose weight the more carbohydrates that I have. However, if I make sure that my fats are up to a certain level, then I will maintain the amount of weight that I have. But I do notice that when I increase my fats rather than my carbs and go on a slightly different ratio, I feel different. My body does look different, and it is almost like I look fatter, if you get what I mean from there. So it might just be, maybe it is a macronutrient split that affects body composition and body fatness.
Yeah, you know, so a couple things. First of all, I feel pretty strongly that dietary fat can contribute to body fatness.
For sure.
And I think that there's a lot of research that makes that pretty clear. I think right now it's kind of unfashionable to acknowledge that dietary fat may have something to do with body fat, but I think at a minimum, it's a factor.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of evidence supporting that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a higher fat diet is fattening. It really depends more on calories for most people. But I think this gets down to another question that we really don't understand. And this is something that's being researched a fair bit right now, but we haven't made much headway on. And that is what, you know, we have these studies, and, you know, sometimes they do look at individual effects rather than just averages, or in addition to averages. And what you can see in studies, for example, that compare low fat and low carbohydrate diets, you can see that some people do just tremendously on a low carbohydrate diet. They lose tons of weight. Their health improves. They get a website and start proselytizing to the internet. And then other people on other people on the low carb diet just do terribly. They'll actually gain weight. And I've had actually a number of people email me over the years and say, and kind of thank me for, because my writing helped them understand that low carb was not necessarily the be all end all for every person. And they realized once they got off of it that it was actually making them fatter. And that's not a typical response, but that is on the spectrum of responses. And same for a low fat diet. So for low fat diets, you have people who go on it and the fat just like melts off them. And then you have other people that will gain fat. And so what explains those individual differences? We really don't know. And actually there was, so one popular hypothesis is that it has to do with your level of insulin sensitivity or insulin secretion. And there is some evidence suggesting that that could impact it. But by far the most rigorous study to ever test the impact of insulin secretion on individual responses to low carb versus low fat diets found a null result. In other words, there was no difference. How much insulin you secreted at baseline had absolutely no effect whatsoever on whether you did better on a low carb or a low fat diet. And that's the only study that was ever actually designed specifically and statistically powered appropriately to ask that question. And so basically we're just kind of like empty-handed right now. And the only thing we can do is say, well, try it and see what works, and recommend things that tend to work more often for more people. And then just tell people, you know, you might have to experiment a little bit and see what's best for you. But I think, it's an open question, and it's possible that some people really do a lot better on certain types of diets than others for reasons of physiology or psychology. I'm not really sure. But I think that's something that we really should explore quite a bit more in research.
I totally agree as well. And it brings us to the end of the podcast with the forever ending question of, well, the forever ending statement of it depends. There is unfortunately never an answer that we can just give, that golden nugget of information or knowledge, no matter how knowledgeable my guests are on this podcast or on the Don't Fear the Weight podcast. It always comes down to it depends, and it is individual. So Stephan, thank you so much for your time today. Just before you go, where can I direct people to follow you and ask you more questions and annoy you even more than I did?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, the primary resource for people who want to learn more about my work is my book, The Hungry Brain. But I also have a website, stephanguyenet.com, where I periodically write blog posts. And if you don't want to spell that, you can also get there through wholehealthsource.org. And then I'm pretty active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @WHSource.
Fantastic. So what I'll do is I'll get all of those links. Guys, I'll put them underneath the comment section here on the YouTube video. And as always, if you have any questions for myself or Stephan, then please get in touch, share the knowledge around so I can keep on getting some awesome more guests on the podcast for next time. So once again, thank you so much, Stephan, for giving up your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's been an absolute fascinating conversation, and take care, and we'll speak to you all in the next episode of TRA Performance Education Podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.